Hey everyone, big news! We've launched a brand new Beyond the Mask website, professionally redesigned to give you a better experience. It's easier to navigate, better organized, and makes it simple to find episodes, explore our exclusive series, and access helpful resources for CRNAs, including CE credits and the 1099 CRNA Institute. Check it out at beyondthemaskpodcast.com. CRNA Financial Planning is a sponsor of Beyond the Mask podcast. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Plus, did you know listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits? For details on how to submit, visit the CE credit section at beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to the Beyond the Mask podcast. This is the Anesthesia Alchemy edition. Join hosts Gary Bridges and Lynn Maxey as they deep dive into today's most important clinical conversations.
Welcome back to Anesthesia Alchemy, Lynn and Gary Unplugged, where we take complex clinical problems and turn them into practical, real-life anesthesia wisdom. I'm Lynn, and today we're diving into something that is quietly becoming a major perioperative issue. And it's one of those topics that slips under the radar because patients don't always think it's important to mention. But trust me, this one matters.
And I'm Gary, and I'll be honest, this is one of those topics that makes me slightly uneasy as an anesthetist. Not because it's rare, but because it's unpredictable. You know, we're talking about Kratom today, a so-called natural supplement that behaves anything but predictably in the operating room. So if you have ever had a patient with unexplained opioid tolerance, a weird emergence, or even an unexpected agitation, this one might be part of that story that you're looking for.
So let's start with the basics, because I had never heard of this before, so this was new for me as we studied this. The kratom comes from a plant called Mitragina speciosa, which is native to Southeast Asia. It's part of the coffee plant.
Wow. And
traditionally, people use the leaves for energy and pain relief, and just all depending on the dose. At lower doses, it acts more like a stimulant, and at higher doses, it behaves more like an opioid.
Yeah, and I think that dual nature is already a red flag for anesthesia providers, certainly. You know, anytime you have a substance that can act both as a stimulant as well as a sedative, you're dealing with something that can shift physiology in unpredictable ways, as we all know. You know, and you add to the fact that modern kratom products are often highly concentrated extracts, and now you're dealing with something that's far removed from traditional use and unpredictability as far as the dosing.
Well, exactly. And what's even more concerning is that many of these products contain high levels of, and I'm going to say this so slowly, 7-hydroxymetagenine, which is significantly more potent at the opioid receptor than the parent compound. Patients may not even know what they're taking or if they're taking it because labeling is so inconsistent. So when they say, I just take Kratom, which is spelled Kratom, not Kratom or something else, but Kratom, that could mean anything from such as a mild tea to a highly potent opioid-like substance.
It's crazy. Well, then let's talk a little bit about the surge, right? Because it isn't just anecdotal. Poison control calls related to Kratom have increased dramatically in the past decade. You know, and members are not subtle. We're seeing more exposures, more severe outcomes, and patients are actually getting hospitalized that are taking Kratom.
That's super scary considering that it's considered a mild thing that you can take and get pretty much anywhere. But one of the key drivers of severity is polysubstance use.
Yeah.
Because many of these patients aren't just using Kratom. I heard that it was pronounced Kratom, but whichever.
Okay.
They're also taking opioids, benzos, alcohol, or even antidepressants. And this combination dramatically increases the risk of respiratory depression, altered mental status, and even perioperative complications.
Well, you know, Lynn, what really worries me from a clinical standpoint is that this isn't always obvious, right? Patients don't necessarily disclose Kratom or Kratom use because they don't see it as a drug. If I'm not mistaken, I think you can even get it at like your local Circle K. Hence Kratom. No, I'm just kidding. So from an anesthesia perspective, you might be walking into a pharmacologic minefield without even realizing it, and these patients can endure significant risk under anesthesia.
And so many of our patients are in a pharmacological minefield as it is, but adding kratom to it certainly doesn't help anything. So let's start to break down the pharmacology in a way that actually helps us in practice. Okay. Kratom's primary alkaloid is a mitragynine, and then there's that 7-hydroxymidagynine, which has much stronger opioid receptor activity. Both these compounds interact with the mu-opioid receptor, which is immediately relevant to how we manage analgesia and sedation.
And it doesn't stop there, Lynn. That's where things actually get messy. Kratom actually has an alpha-2 adrenergic activity also, similar to clonidine or dexmedetomidine in our sort of clinical armamentarium. And there are reports that there's supports of serotonergic effects as well. So now you've got a substance that overlaps with multiple drug classes that we actually use in anesthesia every single day.
But isn't the key issue that it's variable? It's all variability based on if they're given a little or a lot.
Yep.
So there's no standard dosing, no reliable pharmacokinetics, and no consistent product composition. So instead of predictable drug behavior, you're dealing with a spectrum from a mild stimulant effect to profound opioid-like sedation.
Yeah, and clinically, these patients can actually present in a wide range of ways. On one end...
Yeah, I imagine.
I mean, this kind of just speaks to the level of, all these other same things with FDA not regulating vitamins and all these other little things that people can get, right? But on one end, you might actually see mild symptoms like nausea, tachycardia, or drowsiness. And on the other end of the spectrum, you might actually see serious complications like seizures, respiratory depression, even cardiac arrest. Crazy.
And that's with a drug that we don't even know necessarily that they're taking or the patient doesn't understand and enough to know how serious it is to tell us about it. But even beyond all of that, there's withdrawal. This can be really easy to miss if you're not thinking about it too, because patients may become agitated, anxious, hypertensive, and difficult to manage postoperatively. It can look like pain or delirium or even emergence agitation, but the underlying issue is withdrawal physiology.
And that's the trap. If you misinterpret withdrawal as pain or agitation alone, you might escalate opioids or sedatives inappropriately, and now you've compounded the problem instead of actually treating it, right, Lynn?
So it sounds like, okay, from an anesthesia standpoint, there are, three major challenges. First, unpredictable anesthetic requirements.
Yep.
Some patients need significantly higher doses, while others are overly sensitive. And second, opioid tolerance, especially in chronic users. And third, what about the withdrawal risk, particularly if they haven't taken kratom recently?
Yeah. I've personally seen cases where patients have surprisingly high anesthetic requirements and still woke up in significant pain. And in retrospect, kratom could actually explain a lot of that. So it does warrant us as anesthesia providers to be asking those questions related to this agent. It behaves, as you've mentioned, a lot like chronic opioid exposure in many ways, but without the consistency that we're used to managing, it turns out to be highly variable and quite erratic in what is presented to us from these patients.
Well, and exactly. But that's what the inconsistency is what makes planning difficult. You can't rely on your usual assumptions, so we all have to stay flexible and vigilant.
You've probably wondered at some point, should I stay W-2 or go 1099? And more importantly, what would that mean for my income? AANA has launched a new 1099/W2 income comparison calculator designed to help you compare W2 compensation with potential 1099 earnings in just minutes. It also helps you understand how taxes, deductions, and expenses could impact your take-home pay. Try the 1099/W2 calculator today and see how your potential earnings compare. Visit aana.com/1099 calculator to explore the tool, or check this episode's description for the link. The 1099/W2 income calculator, helping CRNAs better understand the financial side of their career choices. Remember, that's aana.com/1099 calculator.
And this is really where we can actually make a difference. Preoperative assessments obviously is one of the banes of our roles, responsibilities, and you have to ask directly about Kratom because patients won't volunteer it. Asking about supplements isn't enough. You actually need to be very specific, especially in this situation. And I'll share something with you, Lynn. I remember many years ago, I was doing anesthesia for bone marrow biopsies. And it wasn't Kratom, but when you have a hunch that the patient may not be revealing everything, you still need to dig more. And, this young lady that was coming for a biopsy, and I had asked, I said, have you had anything to eat or drink since midnight? And she vowed, no. And I said, you're sure? And so that little voice in the back of your mind is like, no, something's wrong. So I said, do you know why we don't have people have anything to eat or drink after midnight? And she goes, well, so that I don't get sick. And I said, no, it's bigger than that. It's so that when I give you this drug, you're going to lose your swallowing reflex, your protective airway reflexes. And if there's something in your gut right now and it comes up and it goes into your lung, 30% of those patients will buy about a week or two in the ICU on a ventilator, and another percentage of that 30% actually die. She broke down in tears. She says, I had a Happy Meal on the way here, and I had coffee with cream. And I was like, I said, so we're not going to cancel. I said, I'm not going to cancel you. I'm going to talk you through this, and we're going to localize you so that if you do get sick, that you're not breathing it into your lungs. But similarly here, these people don't understand the consequences because of how variable this drug is.
Right. I really believe in patient education for that kind of stuff. But if my spidey sense goes off like you're talking about, I'll just say, listen, I'm not the police. I'm not your mother. I'm asking you a question because if I think one thing because you've told me so, and it's really not true, you may die.
Yep.
The reason why we make these rules up is because there's a real chance you could be harmed if you have, for whatever situation I'm talking about, whether they've smoked pot, done heroin, or they've eaten. I give you a drug and you haven't told me the truth, it could kill you.
Yep.
Then I get the truth. Then people kind of get that look on their face.
Like,
okay, I did eat a Happy Meal on the way.
Exactly. Not so happy if it comes up into your lungs.
But once they say yes, let's say they say yes, but we still need details. What form are they using? How often? When was the last dose? Are they using other substances? All of this information helps us anticipate whether we're dealing with intoxication, tolerance, or even withdrawal.
Well, and Lynn, don't underestimate the importance of context, right? A patient using Kratom for chronic pain is different from somebody who's using high potency extracts recreationally. Those distinctions matter when you're planning your anesthetic because the approaches are slightly different.
Intraoperatively, the key is flexibility and multimodal strategy. We should anticipate variability in response and be ready to titrate medications carefully. We don't assume your standard dosing will work.
Yeah, and I lean heavily on multimodal analgesia for these types of cases, and that includes things like ketamine, dexmedetomidine, a regional anesthesia wherever it's prudent or possible. And the goal is to reduce that reliance on opioids while still providing effective analgesia. And I actually had a patient about a month ago that was a chronic pain. Of course, I didn't ask if he was on Kratom, but his tolerance and our ability to try to get pain under control with opioids was near impossible because he was actually on Suboxone. And so,
Oh,
you use every other piece of tools that you have. So I use ketamine, dexmedetomidine, and we put an epidural in this individual. And so I used a high dose bupivacaine, just so that I could avoid, the reversal of the opioids. And so usually, towards the end, I usually give a little bit of hydromorphone, and I thought, well, let me see if I can cover him with this. Normally 1 milligram is pretty good for everybody. I had given him 3.5 milligrams, and he was still puffing on the blower at 24, 26 breaths per minute. And it was like, oh my God, I can't. So I let the acute pain team know, and I said, I don't know what else to do. I mean, I loaded up his epidural, and we used every other, multimodal strategy, but it was a bear, and he was 10 out of 10 on pain. So
wow.
yeah.
Well, what would he have been if you hadn't done all that?
Well, that's the other thing, right? Yeah.
So we've gotten really, really good at regional techniques as we've moved away from using opioids so much. But in this situation, it can be especially valuable because they bypass some of the pharmacological unpredictability. When you can block that pain pathway directly, you're less dependent on all these systemic drug responses.
Yeah, and post-op is where things can really get complicated, as I mentioned earlier, right? Pain control can be challenging, especially in patients with tolerance. And at the same time, you really have to be cautious about respiratory depression if you're starting to escalate those opioids. And, God bless the PACU nurses, because, they got to, bear the brunt of a lot of this, because they're now administering in the PACU, and it becomes a challenge.
Well, in 1 minute, they're flopping in the stretcher like a fish on a hot dock. And the next minute, their tongue's lagging out of their head with a Q sign because they stopped breathing. Yeah. My hat's off to PACU nurses.
Oh, yeah.
We also have to watch out for withdrawal symptoms, which can mimic other postoperative issues. Agitation, hypertension, and anxiety may not be just normal post-op behavior, but recognizing the underlying cause is so critical.
Are you looking to transition into independent practice? AANA and Beyond the Mask are here to help you thrive as your own boss. Visit the 1099 CRNA Institute, taught by Beyond the Mask host Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. This comprehensive educational series provides detailed guidance on business structure, legal and tax implications, and financial management tailored specifically for 1099 CRNAs. Lean into the feeling of freedom and embrace the opportunity to be your own boss. Enroll now and gain the knowledge you need to navigate the business side of independent practice. Plus, enjoy a special 20% discount using the code BEYOND1099 at checkout. Visit aana.com/1099 to learn more and start building the future you want. The 1099 CRNA Institute. Thrive as your own boss.
And I think that's where collaboration helps, right? Involving acute pain management, chronic pain management, even addiction medicine early in, the process can make a really big difference in these patient outcomes.
Well said. Very well said. So let's bring it all together now. Kratom is not benign. Its effects are highly variable. And patients that take Kratom may present with opioid-like tolerance, intoxication, or withdrawal. And each scenario requires a different approach.
Yeah, and from a practical standpoint, the most important step is recognition, right? If you don't ask about Kratom, you won't know that it's there, because they're typically not going to offer it up. And when you don't know it's there, your anesthetic plan may miss the critical risk factors that you do need to address when somebody is on this agent.
So on all patients, we need to use multimodal strategies, monitor very closely, and stay flexible. These patients can do well, but only if you anticipate all the challenges that may come down the pike.
Yeah, and Kratom sits in that gray zone between supplement versus drug. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous in anesthesia. It doesn't follow the rules we're used to, and, it forces us to really think more critically and identify alternative approaches. And as you've mentioned, Lynn, multimodal approaches are key in this scenario.
Right. But it seems like the bottom line, the takeaway is simple. Be curious, be thorough, And don't underestimate what patients consider natural medicines, because in the OR, natural doesn't mean safe. It just means unpredictable, or it can mean unpredictable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we know this was maybe a little bit shorter podcast, but we had a few requests from some of the audience to actually bring this one because providers are now starting to see people arrive to their operating rooms on this agent. And so we do want to thank you for joining us on Anesthesia Alchemy, Lynn and Gary Unplugged. And if you found this helpful, share it with your colleagues because it is something that we're going to see a little bit more of and more often.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary. And stay sharp out there. Stay thoughtful.
And keep practicing anesthesia like it's both an art and a science, in which it is. So thank you for joining us. Please jump on over to the webpage, give us a like, some comments, and if there's something you'd like to see in a future podcast, let us know. Drop us a line and we'll put one together for you.